Wow. Aren't we fancy? Well, good morning. My name is Ed Ostrom, and I'm delighted to be your worship associate this morning. In preparation for this service, I was in the process of editing what I had written. And much to my dismay, I realized that I left the L out of welcome. And so it read, "We come." And then I asked myself, well, why did we come? And I know some of the reasons. We come because everyone, irrespective of their color, their creed, their origin, their beliefs, or their gender, just everyone, even those that drink coffee, are welcome here. That was supposed to be humorous. We come because there's political sanity here. We come because we support the principles and represent the foundation of this organization or institution. We come because old friends are here and guests will become friends in the near future. We come because we feel the warmth expressed by members and friends of this congregation. So remember, leave the L in to feel welcome here, and get the L out if you can't remember why you came. If you are new to our congregation, we are especially grateful that you found us. Our hope is to find ways to connect with you. At this church, we work to embody love and compassion, growth and discovery, freedom, justice, wonder, and joy. Here we learn and grow together to try to live our values out in public. If you found us online, we also hope that you'll email our administrator at office manager at WELMWILM.org, so that we can include you in our regular mailings and let you know about all of the upcoming learning and fellowship opportunities here. And now, let's settle ourselves into this time of worship with this, the morning prelude.
So good morning. I'm the Reverend Larry Piers, minister here at First Unitarian Church of Wilmington. It's great to see you today. It's great to have Vibe Adelphia with us to providing our music. I stood at the door this morning and people were sliding into that door saying they had to be here for part 2 of the sermon. They've been waiting all week. How many of you are part of that group? Okay, great. So I'm glad you're joining us, whether you were here for part 1 or not. Our opening words are by Ralph Waldo Emerson, who we'll be hearing about in the sermon, and it's from a piece called The Oversoul. There is a deep power in which we exist and whose beatitude is accessible to all. Every moment when the individual feels invaded by it is memorable. It comes to the lowly and the simple. It comes to whosoever will put off what is foreign and proud. It comes as insight. It comes as serenity and grandeur. When it breaks through the intellect, it is genius. When it breaks through our will, it is virtue. When it flows through our affections, it is love. With an openness of mind and heart and imagination, let us now gather in a worshipful spirit.
If you have a chalice at home, I invite you to join me by lighting it. Hear the words of Paul Stephen Dodenhoff. For this 1 hour, may we let go of our anxieties, our fears, our anger, our self-doubts, our regrets, our petty grievances, and our distractions. For only this 1 hour, let the flame of this chalice burn them from our hearts and minds and light our way to peace and serenity. For this 1 hour. Following our hymn, please remain standing for our unison affirmation. So now, please join us in singing hymn number 38, Morning Has Broken.
Broken like the first morning, blackbird has spoken like the first bird. Praise for the singing, praise for the morning, praise for them springing fresh from the bird. Sweet the rain's dew fall, dancing from heaven, like the first dew fall on the first grass. Praise for the sweetness of the wet garden, strong in completeness, where God's began. Mine is the sunlight, mine is the morning, born of the one light, Eden's small play. Praise with elation, praise every morning, God's recreation of the new day.
Please join me in the unison. First Unitarian Catholic Church of Wilmington is a beloved community that nourishes minds and spirits, fights injustice, and transforms the world through loving action. Memorial Day, tomorrow, is an American holiday observed on the last Monday in May to honor the men and women who died while serving in the U.S. military. Andrea Brett, an entertainer, met privately with lots of veterans who visited her shows in Branson, Missouri. She was so emotionally stirred by the heroic stories she heard. And in their honor, she wrote a poem entitled, "I Am a Veteran." The words in the poem are symbolic of the experiences of all veterans who have their own stories to tell. You may not know me the first time we meet. I'm just another you see on the street. First, but I am the reason you walk and breathe free. I am the reason for your liberty. I am a veteran. I work in the local factory all day. I own the restaurant just down the way. I sell you insurance. I start your IV. I've got the best looking grandkids you'll ever see. I'm your grocer, your banker, your school teacher. I'm your plumber, your barber, your family's preacher. But there's part of me you don't know. Just listen a moment. I have a story to tell. I am a veteran. I joined the service while still in my teens. I traded my suit for camouflage greens. I'm the first in my family to do something like this. I followed my father like he followed his. Defying my fears and hiding my doubt, I married my sweetheart before I shipped out. I missed Christmas and Easter, the birth of my son, but I knew I was doing what had to be done. I served on the battlefront. I served on the base. I bound up the wounded and begged for God's grace. I gave orders to fire. I followed commands. I marched into conflict in far distant lands. In the jungle, the desert, on mountains and shores, in bunkers and tents, on dank earthen floors. While I fought on the ground, in the air, on the sea, my family and friends were home praying for me. For the land of the free and the home of the brave, I faced my demons in foxholes and caves. Then one dreaded day, without drummer or fife, I lost an arm. My buddy lost his life. I came home and moved on, but forever was changed. The perils of war in my memory remained. I don't really say much. I don't feel that I can. But I left home a child and came home a man. There are thousands like me, thousands more who are gone. But their legacy lives as time marches on. White crosses in rows and names carved in queue remind us of what these brave souls had to do. I'm part of a fellowship, a strong, mighty band of each man and each woman who has served this great land. And when old glory waves, I stand proud, I stand tall. I help keep her flying over you, over all. I am a veteran.
Let us join together now in the responsive reading. The words will appear on the screen, and you'll join in the part that's designated for the congregation. The young dead soldiers do not speak.
Nevertheless, they are heard in the still houses. Who has not heard them?
They have a silence that speaks for them at night, and when the clock counts.
They say, we were young, we have died, remember us.
They say, we have done what we could, but until it is finished, it is not done.
They say, we have given our lives, but until it is finished, no one can know what our lives gave.
We leave you our deaths. Give them their meaning. We were young, they say. We have died. Remember us. We'll end there. So let's join together in a time of prayerful meditation. On this Memorial Day, indeed, let us honor the memory of those who have died in service, in war. As I ring this bell, let's recall the particular names of those who you know, or those places where war has occurred and death has occurred, as well as injury. Say the names. May we not forget the horrors of war, the senseless suffering that is also the result of war, the loss, the death, the grief. We are all complicit in this, all of us, in war, and we are all responsible for peace. May we provide a place of healing from the real and unspeakable grief, the moral injury of war, recognizing our own responsibility for being instruments of peace each day. May we honor the memory of those who have died, and at the same time, may we dedicate ourselves to the works of peace, of healing, and of reconciliation. At this time in our service, we also take a time to share the concerns on our own heart. And so take a moment now to reflect on what are you holding in your own heart today. What are the names or the concerns that you find heavy on your heart today that you might like to share in this room or write in the chat. What are those concerns or names? Speak them aloud in this room. May all those that we have named and those that remain unnamed find peace and healing on this day as we join now in a time of continual meditation during this musical meditation. Perhaps these lyrics from the musical Rent are familiar or somewhat familiar to you. 525,600 minutes, 525,000 moments so dear. 525,600 minutes. How do you measure? Measure a year. In daylights, in sunsets, in midnights, in cups of coffee, in inches and miles, in laughter, in strife, in 525,600 minutes, how do you measure a year in the life? 525,600 minutes, 525,000 journeys to plan, 525,600 minutes. How do you measure the life of a woman or a man? In truths that she learned, or in times that she cried, in bridges he burned, or the way that she died. It's time now to sing out. Though the story never ends, let's celebrate. Remember a year in the life of friends. How many of you were singing along as I was reading that? Of course, the number 525,600 minutes is the result of multiplying 365 days by 24 hours in a day by 60 minutes, equaling 525,600 minutes. There are many ways to measure a year. In the musical, the song was written for the funeral of one of the main characters. So the larger question becomes not just what ways to measure a year, but how do you measure a life? What do we point to, each of us? What do we point to say that this is what our life amounts to? This is the measure of our life. Since today's sermon is Recreating a Life, Part 2, I feel like I'm on a roll. I actually could have my sermon titles for the rest of the year be Recreating a Life, Part 3, Recreating a Life, Part 4, Recreating a Life, Part 5, and so on. But no worries, the titles will be varied. And even though in many ways, we're always reflecting together on this life that we have, considering it, examining it, recreating it as the need arises, this seems essential to what it is that we are about. Now, can you all hear me well today? Is this mic working? Okay, good. If you happened to have listened to part 1 of the sermon last Sunday, you may recall I opened with the story of a man who was surprised to see his own obituary in the paper. This raised the insight of one philosopher that the man did not know that he had died because he did not know that he had lived either. I also referred to the report of the Jungian analyst James Hollis, who pointed out that many of his clients, 70 years and older, seem to have dreams in which their life is going before their eyes, that they are processing unfinished business. They're considering roads taken and not taken, or the need for some self-forgiveness or recreating their life in some way. The truth is that whatever age we are, we can ask ourselves questions about the direction of our life. We can ask, whose life are we living? As May Sarton did in her poem that I referred to, Now I Become Myself, when she realizes that she had indeed, quote, worn other people's faces. Sarton captures her moment of awakening in this life in the final verses of that poem. now to stand still, to be here, feel my own weight and destiny, all fuses now into place, from wish to action, from word to silence, my work, my love, my time, my face. Those pauses that she's referring to, when it all seems to come together one way or another, are available to us more often than we might realize. Indeed, our dreams may call us to consider and review our life, but we can also do it with eyes wide open. To truly awaken in this life might actually require some deliberate practices on our part, particularly in a culture where we're always on the go, go, go. Where this world often seems to conspire to give us very little downtime or time for reflection or to consider redirection in our life. For Sarton, you may recall it was the lesson that she learned as a 10-year-old from a Unitarian minister, to go into the inner chambers of your soul and shut the door, that sustained her throughout her life. Her published journals and her poetry demonstrate that inner work that was hers in the inner chamber of her soul. And we reminded ourselves that we too could seem to be reading our own obituaries unless we could capture the spirit of Thoreau's wisdom in our everyday life, to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, to see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I come to die, discover that I had not yet lived. I'm sure that many of you have been mulling over your assignment from last Sunday, asking less the question, what happened to me, and more the question, what wants to enter the world through me? Let's say that again together. What wants to enter the world through me? And one more time, and let the resonance of those words stay within these walls and not leave prematurely, so that maybe you can hear the whispers of your own response in your own heart to that question during this time that we've gathered here, if it didn't happen this past week. What wants to enter the world through me? The question requires pause, requires reflection, and an openness to the possibility of redirection. Truly, religion, if it is to be a source of awakening in this life, needs us to be engaging in the practices of asking ourselves questions like this one. The Unitarian Universalist minister Forrester Church proclaimed that religion is our human response to the dual reality of being alive and having to die. So let's consider the first part of that, being alive. You and I know that whatever our pulse rate is right now, whatever our breathing pace is right now, whatever our idea about what being alive means, that being alive includes, yes, these vital signs, but much, much, much more. Those, I'm not slamming vital signs, those are important. But many spiritual teachers and philosophers try to convey to us that being alive is a matter of degrees, a matter of a spectrum of consciousness, not just a steady state. I would add that if we're not being stirred into aliveness, if we're not awakening gradually into fuller consciousness, why are we here? Why are we here? Just going to let that question land a little bit. Given the times that we're in, given the lives that we are living, why are we here if not to awaken in this life, to gradually awaken into fuller consciousness of what it means to be alive and responsibly human? Henry David Thoreau spoke most directly to this when he points out that it's not a given that these vital signs in and of themselves point to our aliveness. Thoreau wrote that being alive is a practice, not just a given. He wrote, "We must learn to reawaken and keep ourselves awake." He continued, "Only 1 in a million is awake enough for effective intellectual exertion. Only 1 in 100 million is awakened to a poetic or divine life." Now, Thoreau was writing in the 19th century. We live in a time when even having available attention, not even a mention to be alive and awake, just having attention is a challenge. Do you agree with me? We are so easily distracted. We are living in a time when so much research shows that a diminishment of focus is an epidemic. Where do we tend to give our attention may lead us sometimes to anxiety and depression and overwhelm, and lead us to hypervigilance rather than gradual awakening. We've even coined the expression doom scrolling to describe that practice of scrolling through our phones, through social media and our news feeds. And what we pay attention to can often diminish our attentiveness to life itself. William James, the father of psychology, adds to Thoreau's assessment of the habituation of the human condition to something less than our potential. James wrote, "Compared with what we ought to be, we were only half awake. We were making use of only a small part of our possible mental and physical universe." In his speech before the American Philosophical Society at Columbia University in 1906, entitled "The Energies of Men," men referred to both men and women back then, James states, "Most of us feel as if we lived habitually with a sort of cloud weighing on us, below our highest notch of clearness in discernment, sureness in reasoning, or firmness in deciding. We are making use of only a small part of our possible mental and physical resources." In that speech, James recommended practices that strengthened the will and fortified our willpower over against the tendency to give in to fatigue, to give in to passivity. He recommended certain yoga practices or contemplative practices in order, as he writes, to break through the barriers which life's routine had concreted around the deeper strata of the will, and gradually bringing its unused energy into action. So much of what James writes, I think, seems contemporary because it speaks to a universal challenge of human beings, and that is the challenge to participate in our own unfolding rather than merely succumb to the habits and conventions of the culture around us, rather than to preset our consciousness to only the lower frequencies. Do you hear what I'm saying? And then there's Emerson. Ralph Waldo Emerson's view of aliveness may seem a little esoteric to us compared to Thoreau's practical engagement in life and in the essentials of life and in the natural landscape, and James's pragmatism, practical approach to life and to experience. For Emerson, who we know from his journals read the Vedas and other Eastern scriptures, his view of aliveness comes from a sense of connection to what he called the oversoul. Doesn't that sound a little woo-woo? The Emerson reading from our hymnal that we heard in our call to worship this morning conveys this understanding that we become more alive as we tap into inner resources that are available to recreate our lives. If we are able to recreate our lives, we can then recognize our connection with not just our individual mind, according to Emerson's view, but a universal mind or spirit that animates and motivates and is the unifying principle of all living things, the oversoul. So what are the qualities of those moments? Well, you heard them during the reading. There's a deep power in which we exist and whose beatitude is accessible to all. Every moment when the individual feels invaded by it is memorable. It comes to the lowly and the simple. It comes to whosoever will put off what is foreign and proud. It comes as insight. It comes as serenity and grandeur. When it breaks through our intellect, it's genius. When it breathes through our will, it's virtue. When it flows through our affections, it is love. In fact, Thoreau, James, and Emerson each describe experiences like this most often in nature when their consciousness awakens and they become more alive in this life, more able to participate in the unfolding of their own life. It could very well be that rather than these experiences being extraordinary, they are the most ordinary experiences available to us. There's so many accounts of these awakenings across cultures and history and even in modern science. Since I mentioned James, I will share some snapshot of an experience that he had while camping with friends in the Adirondacks. I had to practice that word a few times. He writes, "It was hard to describe, but he tries to in this way. Quite unexpectedly to me, the night turned out to be one of the most memorable of all my memorable experiences. So you might pause for a moment and think about what would fit that category for you, one of your most memorable of memorable experiences. Let's breathe into that right now. So it continues, he was unable to sleep. He left the cabin. He walked out to the night woods, and he described his experience in this way, where the streaming moonlight lit up things in a magical checkered play. And it seemed as if the gods of all nature mythologies were holding an indescribable meeting in my breast with the moral gods of the inner life. You might not express your experience in that particular way, but those are the words he chose. It was one of the happiest, lonesome nights of my existence, and I understood now what a poet is. A poet is a person who can feel the immense complexity of influences that I felt and make some partial tracks in the inferverbal statements of them. This moment for James was a triggering and catalyzing event. It led to his writing The Varieties of Religious Experience, which many of us have heard about. He came to know directly that religious feeling and awakening could be experienced by anyone, even a sleepless wanderer on a gorgeous Adirondack night. Now, what about that other part of religion that Forrest mentions? Religion is our human response to the dual reality of being alive and also having to die. Well, I've intentionally drawn on Thoreau, James, and Emerson's views of what it means to be alive and awakened in this life because each of them also had an experience with a death that turned their lives around and led to their own awakening. They seem to have known experientially what Forrest Church is talking about. As Robert Richardson points out in his short, thin book, 3 Roads Back, How Emerson, Thoreau, and William James Responded to the Greatest Losses of Their Life. And I emphasize a thin book because most of Robert Richardson's books are quite thick. He's written about Thoreau, he's written about James, and he's written about Emerson. So in this book, he points out that each person was prompted by an unexpected loss and the death of a loved one that caused them to reawaken in this life, to recreate their life. What Thoreau, Emerson, and James have in common then, in each of them, is that they struggled to make sense of the seemingly senseless. The deaths long before their time of Ralph Waldo Emerson's 19-year-old wife, of Henry David Thoreau's 27-year-old brother, of William James's much-loved 24-year-old cousin, Minnie Temple. Their responses to these sad disruptions of their normal life were such to realign them in this life in some distinctly different ways to what life is in a different way before these events had occurred. Indeed, the recreating of our life is somehow or most often prompted by deep experiences within life or of a death, whatever the case may be. Some of us here today know of how this kind of loss can reorganize our life. I certainly do. Alongside whatever grief and sorrow we may be experiencing, these experiences may also be a prompt to relate to life differently because of this death. They can awaken us even in our grief to life's wonder and life's mystery. For Thoreau, the loss of his young wife led him to a deep depression in which he examined the path he had taken as a minister. He turned to science, what was then called natural philosophy, and towards emerging biblical criticism methods of the Bible and of his time, causing him to redefine his faith. On a trip to Europe following his resignation from the ministry, he went to the Jardin des Plantes in Paris. There it is said, quote, "The beauty, the bounty, the interconnectedness of all nature struck him like a vision." He then began to seek regeneration, not just through his inherited Christianity, but through nature itself. His first book, Nature, captures this developing awakening in him. Thoreau had a similar kind of awakening. Following his brother's untimely death, Thoreau laid in bed for 4 weeks. And then a month after he had gotten out of bed and re-entered life, his awakening too was in nature. Thoreau wrote that from seeing the world made up of irreplaceable individuals to seeing it as a whole, huge whole of which everything and everyone is just a tiny piece. Thoreau began to understand that nature finds her own again under new forms without loss. When we look over the fields, we're not saddened because these particular flowers or grasses will wither, for their death is the law of new life. So he was able to move through his grief, through an understanding about the dynamic wonders of nature and of life itself. William James found a way beyond his paralyzing grief following his cousin Minnie Temple's death of tuberculosis, and theirs was a deep spiritual friendship. James endured what he described as a kind of an emotional attack, which made him have a horrible fear of his own existence. And then he came to realize the power within him of his own free will, his own autonomy of self. And he began to develop practical strategies for changing habits, including that of questioning the negative, ruminative thoughts that had absorbed him, what today we might call cognitive behavioral therapy or mindfulness approaches to therapy. And so we come to understand that there's something quintessentially Unitarian Universalist about this emphasis of being awakened while we are alive. For as Unitarian Universalists, we put an emphasis on this life, on the everyday, on discovering meaning and creating places within ourselves and in our congregations where we can hold each other during times of struggle and uncertainty, where we can accompany each other during times of suffering and loss, where we can accept these inevitable moments rather than avoid them, because we know that something happens within the alchemy of life when we do not practice spiritual bypassing, but spiritual deepening. When we don't provide prescribed answers, but instead provide loving, caring presence to ourselves and one another during these times of uncertainty, of loss and grief, times in which new understandings are wanting to break forth within our hearts and our minds and our spirits. And we, all of us, are responsible for cultivating those new understandings within ourselves and helping each other. I recognize that there are at least two movements in the spiritual life. One is that movement of which we really attend to our inner life. We pay attention to what's happening here. We treat it as sacred and important. And at the same time, we give expression to that in the kind of presence that we are in the world. It's not one or the other, but it's that dual movement of paying attention to the inner life and deepening it, and also finding ways to give expression to it in the kind of presence that we are in the world. Now, am I the only person this week who's been listening to and celebrating the music of Tina Turner? So I close with this wisdom from Tina Turner. She says, "People think my life has been tough, but I think it's been a wonderful journey. The older you get, the more you realize it's not what happens, but how you deal with it." So that question of what is life trying to do through me, is such an important accompanying question to what is happening in my life. And may we ask both. May we companion each other as we find responses to those questions, as we recreate our lives again and again. So may it be.
Wonderful, wonderful. Now is the time for us to express our gratitude for this community, its work, its vision, and all of the ways in which it nourishes our lives, from its welcoming doors and sheltering walls to its good and generous people. From time to time, I'm asked what Unitarian Universalists believe. I must admit to initially being stumped. Oh, not because we don't believe, but we believe so much. We believe in freedom of religion, of tolerance for religious ideas, in the authority of reason, and the worth and dignity of every human being. Additionally, I believe in the importance of this place of beauty, this building, our gardens, and most of all, it's good here. But to maintain and grow requires the greenery of foliage and the greenery of money. And with that latter thought in mind, the morning's offering will be greatly received. If you are so inclined, there is a white basket on the wall in the rear of the room. And there are many additional ways you can donate, as cited on the screen above. Then please join me in dedicating our offering. To the work of this congregation, which is weaving a tapestry of love and action, we dedicate our lives and these our offerings. As we extinguish the flame this morning, hear the words of Reverend Gary Smith of Concord, Massachusetts. Go out into the world in peace. Have courage. Hold on to that which is good. Return no person evil for evil. Strengthen the faint-hearted. Support the weak. Help the suffering. Honor all beings. And have a wonderful day.
So following our closing hymn, we invite you to join us in the parish hall for refreshments, and also there's an exhibit of the art from our Creativity Matters group, and also some special needlework as well from June. So please enjoy that art, enjoy fellowship with one another, some great coffee, some wonderful tea, and wonderful fellowship. So our benediction are these words from Henry David Thoreau. Why should we live in such a hurry and waste of life? We are determined to be starved before we are hungry. I wish to live deliberately and to front only the essential facts of life. I wish to learn what life has to teach, and not, when I have come to die, discover I have not yet lived. So Richard will lead us in our closing hymn.
We are going, heaven knows where we are going. We know it is, and we'll get there. Heaven knows how we will get